That day, in a dorm room at Berkeley, I felt true despair for the first time in my life. "I'm sorry, but if the payment cannot be confirmed, you'll need to vacate by next weekend." As I read the email from the dorm administration office, my hands were trembling. The words on the screen seemed to dance, mocking me. Though it was already past mid-September and the campus was filled with the energy of a new semester, my heart felt as cold as ice. My name is Felicia Lee. Born to a Chinese-American father and a Japanese-American mother, I'm the quintessential model student of Asian-American descent. At least, that's how it's been until now. Outside the window, the evening sky was tinted red. A breeze from the San Francisco Bay gently swayed the eucalyptus trees. I could hear the voices of freshmen passing by, laughing and chatting without a care. Their carefree laughter pierced me like needles. 3 weeks ago, I was filled with hope. Acceptance to UC Berkeley with a full scholarship was the reward for 12 years of relentless effort. My parents proudly saw me off at the dorm, and my father, unusually emotional, shed a tear and told me, "You did great." But now, that hope was beginning to crumble. The scholarship check that the university had supposedly sent to my parents. I wanted to believe my father's words. "I'll handle it soon." But my anxiety only grew by the day. I dialed my father's number again. With each ring, I felt my heartbeat quicken. On the 4th ring, my father finally answered. "Felicia? What's up?" His voice didn't carry its usual cheerfulness. "Dad, about the dorm fees." My voice had unintentionally dropped to a whisper. "Oh, that, don't worry. Just wait a little longer." Before my father could continue, I gathered the courage to speak up. "But they're already asking me to leave. If I don't pay by next week." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Outside the window, the evening sky grew darker and darker. When my father finally spoke, his voice was nothing like the one I knew. "Felicia, there's something I need to tell you." This was the beginning of a conversation that would change my life forever. "I used your scholarship money." My father's voice sounded as if it was coming from far away. My mind went blank, and a ringing began in my ears. "Used? What do you mean?" My voice sounded as if it belonged to someone else. My father let out a long sigh. The explanation that followed was like a nightmare. A layoff, mounting debt, the urgent need to pay rent, and the fact that he had temporarily used my $99,000 scholarship fund. I intended to return it soon. There was a new job opportunity. His words had lost all the conviction they once held. In my mind, memories flashed by like a slideshow. When he suddenly quit his job when I was in elementary school, the abrupt move in middle school, the collection notices that arrived almost monthly during high school, and the intense argument when my sister Hannah left home. It was all connected. Maybe I had deliberately looked away until now. It was. For the family. My father's voice trembled. At that moment, the emotions I had been holding back all burst out at once. "For the family? You ruined my life, and that's for the family." I was surprised by my own raised voice. I had never once raised my voice at my father before. "Felicia, calm down. Your father is." My mother's voice broke in over the phone. She must have been beside him. "Are you defending him too, Mom?" My voice was shaking beyond control. "Your father has worked so hard for all of us. Enough." I hung up. It was my first act of rebellion. A deep silence settled over my dorm room. Outside the window, the sun had completely set, and only the streetlights cast lonely beams of light. On my desk, the computer screen still displayed the eviction notice email. Classes start tomorrow. There are report deadlines too, but all of that felt like events in a distant world. I collapsed onto my bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about my life up to this point. The days spent trying to meet my parents' expectations as a model student, not understanding why Hannah chose to leave when she did. Everything was beginning to look different. My phone kept vibrating. It was my father calling, but I no longer had the strength to answer. That night, for the first time, I began to seriously think about what family really meant. Even as the night deepened, I couldn't sleep. Missed calls on my phone had surpassed 30, and messages from my father had exceeded 100. But I couldn't bring myself to open any of them. Around 2 a.m., an unexpected call came in. The name Hannah appeared on the screen. It was the first contact from my sister in 2 years. Without hesitation, I answered. "Felicia, are you okay?" Hannah's voice lacked its usual sharpness. "Hannah, why?" I struggled to hold back my tears. "I heard from Dad." He sounded desperate. Hannah spoke quietly. Then, she began to tell me her own story. An event from 4 years ago, when Hannah was in her second year of college. Dad had secretly opened a credit card in her name, amassing a large debt. As a result, she had no choice but to drop out of college. This is the real reason I left home. There was a painful edge of an old wound in Hannah's voice. "But why didn't you tell me until now?" After a long silence, Hannah replied to my question. "I didn't want to hurt you. And you seem to get along well with Dad and Mom, unlike me." I gave a bitter smile at her words. Get along well? Or had I just been looking away? I don't know what to do. At last, the deep-seated anxiety in my heart found words. "First, you need to protect yourself." Hannah's voice was strong and filled with conviction. "But, Felicia, listen. Loving your family and protecting yourself are two different things. Your father's problems are his problems. You have to live your own life." That night, Hannah gave me practical advice. Consulting the university's financial aid office, applying for emergency assistance, and finding part-time work. And most importantly, the importance of emotional support. Use the counseling services too. I regret not using them back then. We talked until almost dawn. It might have been our first real conversation as sisters. As the sun began to rise, I had made up my mind. I deleted all the missed calls and messages from my father without reading them. Instead, I began making a list of things to do that day. Scheduling an appointment with the financial aid office, applying for counseling services, checking campus job listings, adjusting my class schedule. My reflection on the screen looked a little different. Though dark circles shadowed my eyes, there was a new determination in my expression. Arriving 30 minutes early for my appointment, I sat on the hard hallway chair and reviewed my documents. "Felicia, please come in." Mr. George was a kindly-looking man in his mid-50s. Suppressing the tremble in my voice, I began explaining my situation. The misappropriation of my scholarship by my father, the eviction notice from the dorm, and my current predicament. As I spoke, I felt my voice falter more than once. He listened intently to my story. In his gaze, I sensed not only sympathy but also a deep understanding. "Unfortunately, cases like this aren't uncommon," he said quietly. "Not uncommon." "Yes, especially as a form of financial abuse." I caught my breath at those words. Abuse. That word had never once crossed my mind before. But my father said it was for the family. "Felicia." He spoke gently, but firmly. "Using funds intended for your future without your consent cannot be justified under any circumstances. This is clearly financial abuse." At that moment, I felt something crumble inside me. The persona of the understanding daughter I had struggled to maintain shattered with an audible break. Then, what should I do? First, let me explain the legal options available to you. He pulled out a series of documents. You could report this to the police. This essentially constitutes fraud. I quickly shook my head. I can't do that." He nodded in understanding. "Many students say the same." "In that case, let's look at other options." For the next hour, we discussed various support programs. emergency student aid funds, temporary scholarships, campus work programs. There were more possibilities than I had imagined. However, he added, to receive these forms of support, there is one condition. A condition? Yes, you will need to regularly utilize the university's counseling services. In situations like this, I believe that mental support is essential. His words left me feeling a bit hesitant. Counseling. I had always held a bias, thinking it was only for people with problems. But recalling what I had experienced in the past 24 hours, I felt I could no longer afford to hold on to that prejudice. All right. I nodded slightly. As I left the office, I felt as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. There was no concrete solution yet, but at least I felt reassured that I wasn't alone. My footsteps echoed loudly in the hallway. The waiting room of the counseling center was surprisingly comfortable. Soft-colored walls, potted plants, and afternoon light streaming in through the windows. Felicia, thank you for waiting. Dr. Park, a Korean-American woman in her late 30s, greeted me with a warm smile. Her office had a large bookshelf and a comfortable-looking sofa. So, where would you like to start today? There was a calming quality to her voice. Honestly, I'm not sure where to begin. I continued, searching for the right words. My father using up my scholarship? My mother's attitude? Or maybe reconciling with my sister? Let's start with whatever you most want to talk about. I couldn't help but give a small, wry smile at her words. The thing I most wanted to talk about. I realized, in truth, I wasn't entirely sure myself. I'm angry. Unexpected words slipped out of my mouth. At whom? At my father. No, at my mother too. And I took a deep breath. At myself. At yourself as well? Yes, for not realizing it sooner, for not trying to understand Hannah's feelings when she left home. Tears began to trail down my cheeks. Before I knew it, I was speaking nonstop. The discomfort I had felt in my family since I was young, my father's sudden job changes and moves, the growing debts, and how I had tried to convince myself that all of it was normal. You were just trying to protect your family. Dr. Park's gentle voice echoed softly. But in the end, I became an accomplice. By believing my father's lies, I helped create this situation. That's not true. She spoke quietly but firmly. You are a victim. Children don't need to take responsibility for their parents' actions. At those words, I felt something inside me start to crumble. The guilt I had carried for years, the self-blame, and the inexplicable anxiety. I could feel them slowly beginning to take on a different shape. Then, what should I do from now on? One step at a time, you can start reclaiming your life. Dr. Park pointed to the calendar on her desk. First, let's set some specific goals. From that day, my new life began. After doing some research, I found that the campus dining hall was hiring part-time workers, so I immediately went for an interview. I was hired that same day and was asked to start the next day. My first day on the job was more challenging than I had imagined. Starting work at 5 a.m., washing dishes, preparing ingredients, serving customers tasks I wasn't used to. There was hardly a moment to rest until my evening classes. Felicia, could you handle these vegetables too? The kitchen manager, Kelly, gave me instructions kindly even amidst the busyness. At the end of the day, I returned to my dorm completely exhausted. My hands were pruned, my arms felt heavy, and my legs were like lead. Yet, strangely enough, my heart felt a bit lighter. I started something on my own. That small sense of accomplishment was what kept me going. Meeting Julie, who worked the same shift, also became a major turning point. She was a 35-year-old single mother studying in the evening program while raising 2 children. Felicia, would you mind if I listened to your story? During a break one day, she asked me that. Though hesitant, I shared the events of the past few weeks. My father's betrayal, my mother's attitude, and my current struggles. I've been through something similar. Julie spoke quietly. My ex-husband used up my savings, and there was a time we almost ended up on the streets with my kids. Her experience gave me a new perspective. She had overcome her crisis and built a new life. That became a source of great hope for me. Meanwhile, the pressure from my father continued. I was deleting his emails and calls without reading them, but now he started reaching out through relatives. Your father is hinting at suicide. My hands shook as I read the message from my aunt. Panicking, I contacted Hannah, who responded calmly. This is another one of his usual tactics. He did the same with me. Don't fall for his emotional manipulation. I also discussed this matter in my counseling sessions. You are not responsible for your father's life. Dr. Park's words left a deep impression on my heart. One evening, an unexpected visitor arrived. It was my mother. When I saw her standing outside the dining hall where I worked, like a small shadow, I could hardly believe my eyes. Her usually neat appearance was a bit disheveled, and her complexion was pale. Felicia, can we talk for a moment? Her voice was faint and trembling. After my shift ended, we sat on a bench on campus. The cold October wind carried the silence between us. Your father. She began to speak, carefully choosing her words. His mental state is deteriorating. It was an unexpected revelation. She explained that he was being hounded by debt collectors, unable to sleep at night, and that his guilt over what he'd done to me had plunged him into deep depression. That's why he wants to see you. You want me to let him apologize? My voice turned cold without thinking. My mother shook her head slightly. No, I wanted to apologize. Her unexpected words made me look at her face. I've always followed your father's lead, and I couldn't protect you both. I lost Hannah, and now, I might be losing you too. Tears began to spill from my mother's eyes. I've also started going to counseling. I learned the term, codependency. At that moment, my mother looked different. She was not just the perfect wife and mother she had tried so hard to be, she was a woman who had suffered. But it might be too late. She took a piece of paper out of her handbag. I'm considering a divorce. Her confession brought a flood of complex emotions. Relief, anxiety, and hope. My mother was finally trying to reclaim her own life. I felt a quiet sense of awe at her courage. It's not too late. I surprised myself with the words that slipped out. It's never too late to start. My mother smiled through her tears. In her expression, I saw a light I hadn't seen in years. A week after my conversation with my mother, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I felt a strange sense of foreboding and answered. Is this Felicia? This is Central Hospital. It was news that my father had been rushed to the hospital. A suicide attempt due to an overdose. When I arrived at the hospital, my mother and Hannah were already waiting in the lobby. I was a bit surprised to see Hannah. She had completely cut ties with our father. I felt I needed to be here, she said quietly. We received an explanation from the doctor in front of the ICU. While my father's condition was stable, he would require treatment in a psychiatric ward. Then, a surprising fact was revealed. My father had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder several years ago. However, he had abandoned treatment and stopped his medication on his own. Why didn't you tell us? When I asked my mother, she answered with a weary expression. Your father told me not to, especially not to tell you both. At that moment, many pieces connected. The sudden job changes, impulsive investments, and extreme mood swings. All of it had been part of his struggle with his illness. But that doesn't excuse it. Hannah's voice was calm. An illness is not a reason to hurt others. We spent a long time discussing everything in the hospital cafeteria. My father's treatment, our future plans, and each of our own lives. Maybe we were all victims, my mother murmured. But that ends here. That night, As I returned to my dorm, I was deep in thought. My father's illness might explain some of his actions, but it is not a reason for me to give up on my own life. In my counseling session the next day, Dr. Park offered a new perspective. Understanding and forgiving are different things, and there's no need to rush either. About a month after my father's hospitalization, my life began to shift little by little. Working at the dining hall had unexpectedly helped me grow. My friendship with Julie has become a great support. Hey Felicia, this weekend, I'm taking the kids to the park for a picnic. Want to join us? Spending weekends with Julie and her family had become part of my routine. Her invitations showed me a new form of family. That afternoon, we had a wonderful time at San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. Julie's children, 8-year-old Anne and 6-year-old Emilio, affectionately called me Auntie Felicia. Raising kids alone must have been tough, right? When I asked, Julie smiled. Yes, but people who aren't related by blood supported me in unexpected ways. I learned that family isn't always about blood ties. Her words deeply resonated with me. My father's treatment was progressing. He was participating in a comprehensive program combining medication for bipolar disorder with psychotherapy, and he seemed to be gradually stabilizing. Would you come to visit me? As I looked at my father's message, I pondered for a long time. When I consulted Hannah, she made an unexpected suggestion. Let's go together. In the hospital's visiting room, we faced each other as a family for the first time in 3 years. My father looked surprisingly small. I'm so sorry to both of you. His voice had lost the authority it once held. I've done something I can't take back, especially to you, Hannah. Dad. Hannah spoke quietly. We're not going to talk about what happened back then. What matters is what we do from here on. Those words hinted at the beginning of a new relationship, neither blame nor forgiveness. As the winter term began, new changes were unfolding in my life. Through the university's financial aid office, I was hired as an intern for a financial literacy education program. It's a 15-hour-per-week job where I provide financial education to other students. Your experience will be incredibly valuable, George said, recommending me for the position. My mother moved into a new apartment and started a part-time job. One day she spoke to me with excitement. I've decided to take an evening accounting course starting next week. The divorce process was also underway, but she now appeared calmer and more peaceful than before. After his discharge, my father began living in a small group home. He's gradually trying to regain his daily life, continuing with regular checkups and medication management. I've created a debt repayment plan, he explained to us with a sincere expression. It will take time, but I'll pay back every penny. Hannah had begun establishing a support organization for victims of financial abuse. I've started to get involved little by little in her work. This is something only we can do, she said, encouraging me. And there was an unexpected encounter as well. I met Thomas, a fellow from the financial literacy program. He, too, grew up in a family with a father struggling with alcoholism. By sharing our experiences, a deep understanding began to form. Don't give up on loving someone just because you're afraid of getting hurt. His words resonate deeply within me. In my sessions with Dr. Park, I am working on new challenges. Accepting the past and creating the future are processes that happen simultaneously. As spring approached, a new atmosphere started to flow through the campus. The experiences from my internship revealed new possibilities to me. My interactions with students facing financial difficulties held a profound significance. Your story truly resonates with me, Felicia. When a student told me this, I felt how my experiences could be of help to others. My relationship with Thomas also deepened. Our time together gave me a chance to re-evaluate family issues. You've become stronger. After finishing our study session at the library, as we walked across campus at dusk, Thomas said this: more than becoming stronger. I searched for the right words. Maybe I'm finally able to be myself. Around that time, My father started attending group therapy sessions regularly and was gradually showing changes. "I've been running away from facing my illness," he confessed quietly. "But in doing so, I ended up hurting the people I cared about." My mother completed her accounting course and began working part-time at a small accounting office. "For the first time, I feel like I'm living my own life." There was a new sparkle in her eyes. Hannah's support organization was gradually expanding. "On weekends, I have started working as an advisor as well. Our experiences can become someone's hope." Hannah's words held a sense of certainty. One day, 6 months before graduation, something unexpected happened. "Felicia, do you have a moment?" George from the financial aid office called me in, which was unusual. "A major investment bank on Wall Street has inquired about hiring you. They seem to highly value your accomplishments in the financial literacy education program." That news opened a new door to my future. But it also presented me with a big decision. Hannah's organization was planning to open a branch in New York, and she had invited me to join her. "What do you think I should do?" When I consulted Thomas, he answered quietly, "I think your heart has already decided." Indeed, my answer was becoming clear within me. Gaining experience at the investment bank while continuing to work with Hannah's organization. This might be my way of atonement. My mother supported my decision. "It's your life. You don't need to make decisions for anyone else." I spoke with my father in the hospital garden. "I'm going to New York." After a long silence, he replied, "I want you to be happy." In those words, there was a mix of regret and hope. The preparations for my new life are steadily progressing. A year has passed since I started my new life in New York. My job at the investment bank has been more fulfilling than I anticipated. Working on projects in the microfinance department to support people facing financial difficulties holds a profound significance for me. "Felicia, could you lead the next project?" The trust from my manager, Brandon, has been steadily growing. On weekends, I continue to volunteer with Hannah's organization. The New York branch has been more successful than expected, with a continuous flow of people in need of support. "I'm so glad you're here." "One day," Hannah murmured quietly, "I couldn't have done this alone. I have monthly video calls with my father. His condition has stabilized, and he has started working at a small accounting office. I'm learning to appreciate each day," he said with a calmness that was once absent. "My mother is still studying to obtain her accountant's certification." "It's never too late, is it?" she says proudly. Thomas also left his job in San Francisco and moved to New York. "I want to be by your side." His decision moved me deeply. I regularly have video calls with Julie's children. "Auntie Felicia, we're coming to visit you during summer vacation." I eagerly look forward to that promise. And above all, I have changed. The scars of the past may not have fully healed. However, I have gained the strength to move forward while carrying them. We can't change the past, but the future is in our hands. That phrase, I learned in counseling, continues to guide me. One winter night, I received an unexpected call. "Felicia." My father's voice was calmer than ever. "I've decided. I want to write a book about bipolar disorder and financial abuse. I want my experience to serve as a lesson for others." His proposal made me think deeply. My father's confession hinted at a new possibility. I want to help. The response came naturally to me. Hannah decided to join as well, turning it into a new family project. My mother also agreed to contribute a chapter titled "Liberation from Codependency," sharing her own experiences. "This could be our way of atonement," Hannah said, and I nodded deeply in agreement. Thomas fully supported this plan. I believe that's the true path to recovery. Writing the book brought us new insights. Talking about the past sometimes comes with pain. However, through this process, we found ourselves gradually healing. Family renewal. That became the theme of the book. Afterward, my mother obtained her accountant's certification, and although my father continues with treatment, he is steadily moving forward. I want to live each day with integrity. There was a certain weight to my father's words. Hannah's support organization grew into a nationwide network. This might be our mission, she reflected. As for me, I used my experience at the investment bank to contribute to the development of financial education programs. Thomas and I are planning our wedding for next spring. It will be a small ceremony, but those who matter most to us will be there. A new beginning for our family. When my mother said this, I was able to give her a genuine smile. Life may not go the way we envision, but sometimes those unexpected paths provide the most valuable lessons. Now, snow is quietly falling outside the window. The Manhattan skyline glows softly. This is not the end. It is the beginning of a new story.